If you open a standard history textbook, you will find 40 pages on how the Romans built their roads, 50 pages on medieval battle armor, and approximately 0 sentences on how half the human population managed their menstrual cycles while doing the daily, grueling work of survival. For thousands of years, historians, almost all of whom were men, simply ignored this topic. They wrote about emperors, wars, and empires, but completely excluded the daily, intimate reality of women's health. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Women have never been passive victims of their biology. Across every civilization, on every continent, women developed practical, remarkably sophisticated, and medically advanced solutions to manage their cycles, long before the invention of modern disposable products. But to understand how they did it, we first have to bust a massive biological myth. Most people assume that ancient women dealt with their periods exactly the way modern women do, just without a pharmacy nearby. But biologically, that is completely wrong. In the modern world, a healthy woman will menstruate roughly 450 times in her life. But an ancient hunter-gatherer or early agricultural woman only menstruated about 50 to 100 times in her entire lifetime. Why? Because ancient women spent the vast majority of their reproductive years either pregnant or actively breastfeeding, which naturally suppresses ovulation and menstruation for up to 2 years at a time. Combined with lower body fat percentages and seasonal food scarcity, periods were an infrequent, occasional event rather than a monthly expectation. But when their periods did arrive, how did they handle them? The answer depends entirely on whether they lived in a society that viewed menstruation as a sacred power or a dangerous curse. Let's look at ancient Egypt first. In Egypt, menstruation was not considered shameful. It was connected directly to fertility, to the goddess Isis, and to the flooding of the Nile, the literal source of Egyptian life. The Egyptians documented everything, including gynecology, in texts like the Ebers Papyrus dating to 1550 BC. To manage their flow, Egyptian women used softened papyrus as a kind of primitive pad or rolled up soft linen, the same absorbent, reusable material they used for their clothes. It was practical, highly hygienic, and very on brand for a civilization that invented calendars and medicine. But if Egypt was the hero of this story, ancient Greece was the absolute villain. Ancient Greece gave us democracy and philosophy, but it also committed some of the most spectacularly wrong ideas about the female body to paper. Aristotle, one of the most celebrated minds in Western history, confidently wrote that menstrual blood was actually failed semen. He argued that because women's bodies were inherently colder and weaker, they couldn't physically cook the blood into semen. Ridiculous, I know. Because of this framework, Greek medicine viewed menstruation as proof of female biological inferiority. But while Greek men were writing absurd philosophy scrolls, Greek women were busy finding practical solutions. They most likely used wool. In a society built largely around sheep farming, soft, absorbent wool was the obvious choice. Women would fashion small wool pads or wraps, essentially creating the earliest internal tampons, to manage their flow. Meanwhile, in Rome, the confident ignorance reached a whole new level. Pliny the Elder, a famous Roman academic, wrote a massive encyclopedia called Natural History. His section on menstruation is a masterpiece of unhinged panic. According to Pliny, menstrual blood was a walking environmental hazard. He claimed that if a menstruating woman walked through a field, she would kill the crops, turn wine to vinegar, blunt swords, drive dogs mad, rust iron, and repel hailstorms. Roman women, of course, did not believe they possessed crop-killing superpowers. They got on with their lives. Wealthy Roman women had access to fine linen and soft wool, while poor women used rougher rags or sea sponges. Natural sea sponges, easily harvested from the Mediterranean, were soft, highly absorbent, and easily washed and reused. The gap between what wealthy women could access and what ordinary women could manage is ancient and consistent. If you're enjoying this journey into our hidden evolutionary history, take a split second to hit the subscribe button. It's a tiny action, but it helps us grow faster. Now, back to the story. Before we move forward in history, we need to talk about something that shaped menstrual practices more than any material invention: taboo. Across many ancient cultures, menstruating women were subjected to strict ritual isolation. In ancient Zoroastrian texts, women were kept in isolated rooms and denied contact with fire, water, and the earth. In medieval Europe, the Church reinforced the idea that menstruation was a curse from Eve, a physical reminder of sin. But in other parts of the world, this isolation was viewed in a completely different light. In many North American indigenous traditions, menstruating women would temporarily live in dedicated structures called moon lodges. For decades, Western historians assumed this was a cruel punishment. But indigenous oral history reveals the exact opposite. Far from being a banishment, the moon lodge was a monthly spiritual retreat. Women during their cycles were believed to be at their absolute peak of spiritual power. They were exempted from all grueling physical labor, cooking, and camp chores. They used the time to rest, connect with other women, and perform sacred rituals. It was a period of rest and renewal, and women returned to the tribe with heightened social status. Inside the moon lodges, Native American women managed their flow using highly absorbent maguey fibers, soft leaves, or moss. Further east, in traditional Chinese medicine, menstruation was treated with immense medical respect. Unlike the Greeks and Romans, who viewed the female body as a broken version of a male body, Chinese physicians treated it as a complete, balanced system. The quality and timing of menstrual blood were used as primary diagnostic tools. Chinese women used soft cloth pads made of silk or cotton, held in place by woven belts tied around the waist, a design remarkably similar to modern reusable pad holders. And they also possessed a highly advanced pharmacopoeia of herbal medicine. Midwives across China, Europe, and the Americas used specific herbs like parsley, ginger, cinnamon, and pennyroyal to stimulate uterine contractions, regulate cycles, and ease menstrual pain. Modern science has confirmed that many of these traditional herbs contain active chemical compounds that have genuine, measurable physiological effects. But if women had been managing their cycles effectively for thousands of years, how did we end up with the massive, multi-billion-dollar disposable product industry we have today? It started in the late 19th century. In 1888, Johnson & Johnson produced the first commercially disposable menstrual pad, called Lister's towels. It was a complete and utter commercial failure. In Victorian society, the taboo surrounding menstruation was so extreme that women were far too embarrassed to purchase them from a male pharmacist over the counter. The product quietly failed. It wasn't until 1921, when Kotex reframed pads as a modern, hygienic necessity rather than a shameful secret, that mass adoption finally took off. For 99% of human history, women managed their periods with whatever they had on hand: wool, sponges, leaves, and cloth, and did so effectively enough to build civilizations. The modern disposable pad is barely 100 years old. It is a tiny blink in the timeline of human history. We have spent centuries treating this basic biological function as a dirty secret, or a clinical medical issue to be hidden away. But your ancestors didn't see themselves as passive victims of their biology. They developed medicine, engineered tools, and built networks of support to handle their cycles with dignity and intelligence. And if you want to explore more hidden, mind-blowing mysteries about our ancient bodies, and how our ancestors managed to survive the harsh realities of the prehistoric world, click the video on your screen right now.